Elena Carter moved through the grand halls of the Carter mansion, her hand resting gently on her rounded belly. At 8 months pregnant, she glowed with anticipation, her eyes bright with excitement as she imagined holding her first child. Every corner of the home reflected wealth and taste. Sparkling crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, and velvet drapes framed panoramic views of manicured gardens. She paused in the nursery, a room painted in soft pastels, where a crib adorned with delicate lace awaited the arrival of her baby. Shelves were lined with tiny shoes, carefully folded blankets, and handcrafted toys. Elena smiled softly, imagining lullabies and late-night feeds, completely immersed in the promise of motherhood. Adrian Carter, her husband, emerged from the study, impeccably dressed as always, radiating charm and confidence. With a smile, he reached for her hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and whispered how beautiful she looked. On the surface, their life seemed perfect. A billionaire husband doting on his wife, a home filled with luxury and comfort, and the imminent arrival of a child that would complete their picture-perfect family. Yet, beneath the polished veneer, subtle cracks were beginning to show. Adrian's smile occasionally faltered. His phone buzzed with calls he quickly silenced, and there were moments when his attention seemed elsewhere, fleeting and distracted. Elena noticed these small shifts but dismissed them, attributing them to the pressures of his business empire. She clung to hope, convinced that their love and their family would withstand any storm. She had no idea that her perfect life, the one she had worked so hard to build alongside Adrian, was on the brink of unraveling. The shadows of betrayal and heartache were creeping closer, entirely hidden behind the glittering walls of wealth and privilege. For now, Elena remained blissfully unaware, her heart full of anticipation and trust, savoring what she believed was a flawless, unshakable life. Sophie Lang sat in the back seat of her sleek black limousine, scrolling through invitations to the city's most exclusive events. Every detail mattered: the lighting, the crowd, the photographers. Appearance was everything, and Sophie knew that if she faltered even slightly, her place in Adrian Carter's glamorous world could be threatened. She was more than just a mistress. She was a calculated socialite, always glamorous, always in control, or at least appearing to be. Today, however, her reflection in the tinted window revealed a small flaw, a subtle imperfection that could ruin her carefully curated image. She needed plastic surgery, and she needed it immediately, or the high-profile gala in 2 days would expose her vulnerability. Her dependence on Adrian went far beyond luxury. He provided the financial means for her lifestyle, the access to elite circles, and, most importantly, the validation she craved. Sophie thrived under his attention, and the thought of losing it sent a shiver down her spine. She knew exactly how to manipulate him, using charm, vulnerability, and seductive cunning. Every text she sent, every whispered word during their secret meetings, was designed to keep Adrian under her spell. Sophie's mind raced as she plotted her next move. She would make sure that Adrian cancelled any obstacles, even if it meant disregarding his pregnant wife's needs. The thought of Elena never crossed her mind as a person. She was merely a barrier, an inconvenience in Sophie's meticulously constructed world. Nothing would stand in her way. Her beauty, her influence, and her control over Adrian were all that mattered, and she would do anything to preserve them. Elena arrived at the pristine hospital, her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. Today was the day she was supposed to have her scheduled C-section, the moment she had been dreaming of for months. Every detail had been meticulously planned. The baby's room at home was ready, the hospital bag was packed, and Adrian had promised he would be by her side the entire time. The sterile scent of the hospital didn't calm her. Instead, it heightened her anxiety. She clutched her husband's hand as they approached the reception, expecting reassurance, warmth, and the simple comfort of normalcy. Instead, confusion greeted her. A nurse approached with an apologetic expression, and Elena's heart sank when she heard the words she could never have imagined. Adrian had cancelled her surgery. The reason given was curt and clinical, yet the weight behind it crushed her. Her procedure had been postponed to accommodate a same-day request for another patient, someone else entirely. Shock rippled through her, disbelief and anger colliding with the fear for her unborn child. Her mind raced as she tried to understand. How could Adrian, her loving husband, allow this to happen? How could someone else take precedence over her and their baby? Emotions tangled inside her like a storm. She wanted to cry, to scream, to confront Adrian immediately, but she felt paralyzed, unable to move or speak. The trust she had placed in her husband, the one person she thought would protect her, had been shattered in an instant. Elena's heart pounded as she realized that her perfect life was slipping through her fingers, replaced by betrayal and humiliation. The storm she had been blind to was now crashing over her, and there was no shelter in sight. Adrian sat in his sleek office, phone pressed to his ear, a mask of calm confidence covering the tension beneath. "Sophie, don't worry. Consider it done," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that bent the world to his will. On the other end, Sophie's breathy, excited chatter betrayed her relief. Adrian promised her the urgent plastic surgery she desperately needed, rationalizing to himself that it was just a small favor, nothing more, nothing that would truly matter in the long run. In his mind, Sophie's social influence, charm, and ability to enhance his public image outweighed any inconvenience. He leaned back in his leather chair, scrolling through messages from Elena, ignoring the subtle pang of guilt that occasionally tugged at the edge of his conscience. He told himself she would understand. She always trusted him, and this would blow over. In truth, his reasoning was built on arrogance and selfishness, a deep-seated belief that his desires were paramount. Adrian saw no fault in prioritizing the mistress whose looks and presence could further his own ambitions over the pregnant wife who had given him loyalty and love. Yet even as he spoke to Sophie, arranging the details of her surgery, a faint flicker of doubt appeared, quickly extinguished by his habitual rationalizations. He dismissed Elena's feelings as temporary, inconsequential, and certainly manageable. This conversation was a clear window into Adrian's character. Confident, charming, and utterly self-serving. While the world saw a devoted husband and successful billionaire, beneath the surface was a man who measured relationships by convenience and advantage. The storm was brewing, but Adrian, blinded by ego and obsession, remained oblivious to the emotional devastation his actions were about to cause. Elena returned home later that evening, her steps heavy, her mind spinning with disbelief. The grandeur of the Carter mansion, which usually brought her comfort, now felt suffocating, echoing the emptiness she suddenly sensed. Every opulent detail, the crystal chandeliers, the polished marble floors, the velvet drapes, reminded her that appearances meant nothing when the people she loved could betray her so easily. She had trusted Adrian completely, believing in his devotion and integrity, and yet in a single devastating moment, that trust had been shattered. Friends and family remained unaware of the day's events. Elena put on a fragile smile whenever calls came in, hiding her tears behind polite laughter and light conversation. She couldn't bear anyone knowing the depth of her humiliation or the fear she felt for her unborn child. Alone in the quiet of her bedroom, Elena's emotions finally spilled over. She cried, not just for the cancelled surgery, but for the life she thought she had, a life that now felt like a fragile illusion. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined, leaving a raw ache in her chest that no amount of comfort could soothe. Yet even in her pain, Elena's mind began to sharpen. The initial shock slowly transformed into a simmering anger, a realization that she could not remain passive. Beneath her vulnerability, a spark of determination ignited. She had been blindsided, but she would not allow herself to be destroyed. The man she loved, or thought she loved, had exposed his true priorities, and she would need to find her own strength to navigate the treachery that now surrounded her. Elena's hope, once naive, evolved into a quiet, resolute courage. She may have been betrayed, but she was not broken, and the first seeds of empowerment began to take root, silently preparing for the day she would reclaim her life. Sophie emerged from the surgical suite later that afternoon, her face carefully bandaged, a mix of excitement and impatience in her eyes. The same-day plastic surgery had gone flawlessly, and she already envisioned the stunning transformation that would ensure her place at the city's most prestigious events. Every detail mattered: her nose slightly refined, her cheekbones subtly enhanced, her skin radiant and flawless. Sophie's obsession with perfection was relentless. Nothing could be left to chance. This surgery was not merely cosmetic. It was a calculated investment in maintaining control over Adrian and the world he had granted her access to. Adrian hovered nearby, a mixture of pride and possessiveness in his gaze. Sophie's dependence on him was clear, yet he thrived on it, feeding her need for attention while using her beauty and charm to bolster his own image. The surgery was a perfect reflection of their twisted symbiosis. She needed him to maintain her allure. He needed her to sustain his ego and social standing. Their dynamic was intoxicating and dangerous, a delicate balance of power and desire that left no room for interference from anyone else, least of all his wife Elena. As Sophie examined her reflection in the mirror, a sly smile curved her lips. She had achieved exactly what she wanted, and she had done it without considering the cost to anyone else. Elena was a distant, irrelevant obstacle in her mind, someone to be ignored or outmaneuvered at every turn. Sophie's vanity and manipulation had been rewarded, and she was already plotting her next move to ensure Adrian's unwavering attention. In her world, beauty was currency, control was everything, and no one would stand in her way. Within hours, rumors began to swirl. Discreet whispers among hospital staff, a tip to a gossip columnist, and a few unnoticed social media posts combined into a storm of speculation that no one could ignore. The story was simple yet scandalous. Adrian Carter had prioritized his mistress's cosmetic surgery over his pregnant wife's scheduled C-section. At first, Elena remained unaware, her attention consumed by her emotional turmoil, but the moment the news began to spread, reality struck like a cold, relentless wind. Friends began messaging with concern. Journalists were already digging for confirmation, and social media exploded with outrage. Elena struggled with a chaotic mix of embarrassment, fear, and disbelief. The world, it seemed, was watching her most private pain unfold publicly. She had believed in the security of her private life, the sanctity of her home, and the loyalty of her husband, yet now she was laid bare, exposed to judgment and scrutiny. Every notification on her phone felt like a fresh wound, each message a reminder of how quickly trust could be destroyed. Even casual acquaintances offered sympathetic comments, oblivious to the deeper betrayal, while strangers criticized her supposed passivity, misunderstanding the complexity of her emotions. Amid the chaos, a loyal friend, a journalist who had admired Elena's poise for years, stepped forward. Quietly, they began gathering evidence, documenting the events and conversations that revealed Adrian's true priorities. This ally became Elena's anchor, a lifeline in a storm of betrayal, offering both support and strategy. With their help, Elena began to see a path through humiliation toward empowerment. The initial fear that had paralyzed her transformed into determination. She realized that while the media could expose Adrian, she could also reclaim control, turning public attention into a weapon rather than a curse. Elena spent the following days quietly observing, listening, and planning. The humiliation of her cancelled surgery and the public scandal had ignited something fierce within her, a determination not only to survive but to reclaim her power. She no longer allowed herself to be consumed by despair. Instead, she focused her energy on understanding Adrian's weaknesses, his patterns, and the people who could help her turn the tables. She knew that acting impulsively would be dangerous. Patience and strategy were now her greatest allies. She began by cultivating allies in unexpected places. Friends who had once seemed peripheral became invaluable sources of insight, while journalists who respected her poise were willing to document the truth. Elena compiled evidence meticulously. Messages, financial records, and subtle discrepancies in Adrian's behavior. Every detail became a potential tool, a weapon she could wield to restore justice and dignity. Even Sophie, with all her vanity and arrogance, was under Elena's careful scrutiny. The mistress's dependence on Adrian revealed cracks in her armor. Sophie thrived only because Adrian allowed her to. If Elena could manipulate the same leverage, she could destabilize the mistress's hold. Elena also worked on herself, not just strategically but emotionally. She took long walks in the gardens, meditated, and allowed herself moments of reflection, cultivating a calm strength that radiated from within. Her resolve hardened. No longer the naive, trusting wife, she was becoming a woman who would act decisively, with precision and intelligence. The world had underestimated her, and soon, Adrian would discover that the consequences of his selfishness were far greater than he could imagine. The storm that had initially threatened to destroy her was now the fuel for a comeback that would leave a lasting impact, transforming betrayal into empowerment. The night of the gala arrived, and Elena entered the grand ballroom with a composed elegance that drew every eye. Dressed in a gown that was sophisticated yet understated, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had regained control of her life. Adrian and Sophie were already there, their usual dynamic on display. Sophie flaunting her freshly enhanced beauty, Adrian radiating pride at having her at his side. But Elena's presence shifted the energy in the room. Whispers followed her. Curiosity mingled with admiration, and for the first time, she felt the power of being fully seen and respected on her own terms. When she approached them, the confrontation began. Her voice was calm but firm, each word deliberate. "I've learned a lot in the past few days," she said, eyes locking on Adrian. "About priorities, about loyalty, and about respect." Adrian tried to interject, offering excuses, his charm now thin and ineffective against the steel in her tone. Sophie's confident mask faltered, her smirk replaced with uncertainty. Elena's strategy was not to attack recklessly, but to expose the truth and let the weight of it speak for itself. As the conversation unfolded, Elena revealed evidence she had carefully compiled: messages, financial documents, and subtle details of Adrian's manipulation. The room, filled with high-profile guests and media insiders, began to feel tense. Whispers rippled through the crowd, eyes widening as the layers of deceit were unveiled. Adrian's arrogance wavered. Sophie's carefully constructed dominance began to crumble. Elena's composure remained unshaken, and in that moment, it became clear who truly held power. The confrontation was not about vengeance alone. It was a reclamation of dignity, a clear declaration that betrayal would no longer dictate the course of her life. Elena emerged from the gala with a renewed sense of self, feeling lighter and more powerful than she had in months. Adrian's misdeeds were now publicly acknowledged, and Sophie's dominance over him had been exposed. No longer shackled by the illusions of wealth or charm, Elena realized that true power came from self-respect, clarity, and the ability to act decisively. Every betrayal, every slight, had been transformed into fuel for her growth, shaping her into a woman who would no longer be manipulated or diminished. At home, she focused on her newborn, cradling the child with a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. The bond she shared with her baby reminded her of what truly mattered: love that was genuine, unselfish, and nurturing. Elena had been forced to confront the harsh realities of human weakness, deception, and selfishness, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and fully aware of her own strength. She began making plans for the future, considering her independence, her career, and the ways she could protect and nurture her family without relying on anyone who had once betrayed her trust. Adrian faced consequences, both publicly and privately. His reputation suffered as the scandal spread, and those who once flattered him began to distance themselves. Sophie's allure, once untouchable, had lost its influence, revealing the fragile dependence she had on Adrian's power. Meanwhile, Elena's inner circle rallied around her, admiring her composure and courage. In reclaiming her life, Elena had not only survived betrayal but transformed it into a catalyst for empowerment. She had proven that no amount of wealth or manipulation could diminish her worth, and that strength, dignity, and resilience could triumph over even the most calculated acts of selfishness. Weeks later, Elena sat in the nursery, softly rocking her newborn in her arms. The room, once a symbol of anticipation and the perfect life she had imagined, now represented resilience, love, and new beginnings. Each delicate toy, each carefully chosen blanket, carried the memory of trials she had endured and overcome. She marveled at the small life in her arms, feeling a sense of purpose and fulfillment that no betrayal, no scandal, and no wealth could ever define. Elena had endured heartbreak, humiliation, and deception, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and fully aware of her own power. Life outside the mansion had changed as well. Adrian's influence waned as the public learned of his reckless decisions, and Sophie's carefully maintained facade crumbled under scrutiny. Elena, however, no longer measured her worth by anyone else's perception. She had built her independence from the ground up, learning to trust herself, her instincts, and her ability to navigate a world that often demanded compromise. Every decision she made now was rooted in self-respect and clarity, ensuring that neither wealth nor manipulation could ever again dictate the course of her life. As she gazed at her baby's peaceful face, Elena felt a profound sense of hope. The future was hers to shape, free from the shadows of deceit and betrayal. She could pursue her ambitions, nurture her family, and embrace love on her own terms, whether romantic or simply self-directed. Elena's journey had been tumultuous, but it had led her to a place of empowerment, resilience, and authenticity. The perfect life she once imagined had been shattered, but from its fragments she had built something far stronger, a life defined not by wealth or control, but by courage, love, and unwavering self-respect.